The first thing I smelled was hot rubber and triumph. Not mine, theirs. It was 6:07 a.m. and my street, the narrow ribbon of asphalt I'd sealed myself every spring with a 5-gallon bucket and a broom, was lined bumper to bumper with cars that didn't belong to the people who lived here. The HOA's cars, their board's cars, their volunteers' cars with those neat little laminated tags on the dash that said event access, like a smirk. I stood at the edge of my driveway in a bathrobe and boots, feeling the dawn air bite my cheeks while the rumble of a generator echoed from the cul-de-sac where they were setting up a pop-up archway and stringing pennant flags across the entrance to my road. Our road, I corrected myself out loud, though my voice sounded small against the clatter of metal stakes and the crisp, barked orders of a man whose voice I would recognize by afternoon in every corner of my skull. Block it off here. Move the cones tight. We don't want pass-through traffic. A cone scraped across my property line, and clicked to a stop at the mouth of my driveway like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't written. The orange plastic flared in the newborn sun, the same color as an alarm bell. Somewhere a gull cried like a hinge. I could smell coffee. Exhaust, dew, the faint tar-sweet memory of summers I'd spent repainting those edges by hand, while my knees complained and my wife called from the porch that I'd missed a spot. I stepped forward. The cone rocked. I nudged it aside with the toe of my boot. A kid in a yellow volunteer vest, no older than 20, with acne bright as berries on his cheeks, jogged over with a polite smile. "Sir, this area is closed for the HOA Fun Run and Street Fair," he said, 9 to 3. "Thanks for understanding." Understanding, I repeated. I could feel my heartbeat in the tender scars of my palms. There was a time when I'd carried 12-foot lumber on these hands, poured fence posts by moonlight, on these hands dragged branches, after the monsoon winds split our cottonwood. Like a wishbone on these hands, I swallowed. "You're parking on private property. This isn't HOA road." The kid's smile flickered just a fraction, and he glanced over his shoulder. A man in a navy polo turned, broad-shouldered 30-something, with a tan that said golf, not labor. The badge pinned to his chest read, President, beneath a last name that looked like a law firm. He walked toward me with the poise of someone used to cameras catching his good side. "Morning, sir. Great day for the fair. I'm Aaron," he said, and I'd later learn he was 35. But right then, all I saw was the entitlement of youth. "Don't worry, we've got this area permitted. The board voted last week." "Voted on my deed?" I asked softly. The word deed felt heavy in my mouth like a coin you don't want to spend road use. He corrected briskly. His cologne smelled like citrus on stainless steel. "The community benefits from cohesion. We're centralizing traffic onto your street to keep the main boulevard clear for vendors and emergency access. It's safer." He gestured to the cones, his hand slicing the morning like a blade. "We'll be wrapped by 3. Your cooperation is appreciated." Behind him, an SUV nosed tight against my mailbox. Tires scuffed my curb where I'd stenciled my house number. The driver door opened, a man swung out without looking at me, and shouldered a cooler so large it pressed a white mark into his shirt. The metal handle squealed. The sound grated the way a dentist's drill grates. At the far end of the road, a delivery truck rattled over the seam I'd patched last May. The crack I'd babied with a kneaded rope of filler like a wound that wouldn't close. "Cooperation," I said again, tasting it now for what it was, a request dressed as a command. Aaron's eyes never left my face, even as he lifted a hand, and the kid in the vest slid the cone back against my driveway, a bright little wall. Something inside me went quiet, that dangerous quiet you hear right before a storm breaks. Not anger exactly, not yet. Something like a ledger balancing. Something like a gate settling into its hinges. "Show me the permit," I said. He flashed paper smooth as a card trick. I didn't blink. I watched his finger land on a line that said, Common Area Easement, and watched it skip the line below that detailed maintenance responsibility, which had my name on it, like a scar. He smiled a small professional smile. "We'll clean up after, no worries." The words landed as litter. A woman in jogging tights trotted past in formation, with three others, their ponytails swishing in synchronized arcs like metronomes. "Love the route," one called to Aaron. "So much shade here." The shade. She meant our cottonwood. My cottonwood. And I thought of nights I'd stood under that tree listening to the tiny hammers of rain on leaves, the way you listen at a hospital door. Aaron clapped the kid on the shoulder. "Let's keep it tight. If anyone gives you trouble, direct them to me." He started to turn, then paused as if remembering something. "Oh, and sir, if you could keep your driveway clear, this is going to be a staging lane." Staging lane, I looked down the line of cars, skins shining in the growing sun like a school of fish. There were hatchbacks, sedans, and glossy SUVs, a convertible with its roof up like a clenched fist. Keys clicked. Door locks chirped. Vendors laughed. A child screamed with the excitement that only sugar promises and balloons can wring from them. I lifted the cone, set it aside somewhere that was not my driveway. "You're staging on the wrong road," I said. My voice was calm, the way a lake looks calm right until you notice the current. He tilted his head. "Is that a threat?" "Not at all, manam," I said and turned back toward my garage where the old metal door growled upward into shadow. Cool air spilled over me, carrying the smell of oil and cedar and the quiet company of tools lined like soldiers on a pegboard. A fluorescent light flickered awake and steadied. I put my hand on the scarred workbench where I'd repaired bike chains, birdhouses, and the kind of small broken things men bring inside instead of talking. They'd taken my road at dawn. By dusk, I would take back what was mine, or take something they'd never see coming. I should start by telling you something about myself. My name is Daniel McCarthy, 65 years old, widower, retired electrician. I'm not the kind of man who picks fights. I spent 40 years wiring hospitals, schools, and tract homes across this valley. My shoulders stained with drywall dust, my fingers etched with nicks from copper and steel. I built a reputation on steadiness. People trusted me to flip a switch and bring their house to life. When my wife Claire was alive, she used to joke that I'd rather fix a stranger's breaker box than complain to a waiter about a cold steak. She wasn't wrong. I'm not confrontational by nature, but I do believe in lines, property lines, moral lines. You cross them enough times and you'll find me standing there, waiting. Claire and I bought this house 38 years ago. It was a tired ranch style back then, with sagging gutters and a backyard overrun with weeds. But it was ours. Every nail I replaced, every brush of paint, every slab of concrete poured into the driveway, that was a kind of vow we renewed together. Even after she passed 5 years ago, I kept the place the way she would have wanted. Trimmed hedges, fresh stain on the porch. The street is kept clean. That street mattered more than most people would understand. Because it wasn't just pavement. It was where my daughters learned to ride their bikes, where neighbors gathered for 4th of July sparklers, where I walked Claire on quiet evenings when her illness kept her from going far. My road wasn't just asphalt. It was memory set in tar and stone, which is why when Aaron showed up in that navy polo, all charm and cologne, I felt the shift before I could name it. Aaron was 35, maybe younger, though he carried himself like a man who thought life already owed him tribute. Broad shoulders, golfer's tan, hair trimmed sharp on the sides. The kind of man who could sell you a bad deal and still shake your hand like he'd done you a favor. He introduced himself as the new HOA president. I didn't recall voting for him, or anyone for that matter. Our neighborhood had always had a board on paper, but for years they'd been quiet, collecting small dues, mowing the shared median, putting up Christmas lights in December. Nothing more. Aaron changed that within 6 months of moving in. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't background noise. It was front and center, a stage he strutted across like a ringmaster. At first, it was little things. Letters slipped under doors reminding people of color conformity for garage paint. Notices about improper storage if a trash can lingered too long at the curb. He sent me one myself, bold red ink on white paper. Please move your trailer. Not compliant with HOA aesthetic standards. It wasn't a trailer. It was a utility cart I'd used for hauling lumber since the 1980s. Rusted, sure, but still functional. It sat neatly beside my garage, on my property. When I called the number at the bottom of the letter, a receptionist informed me, politely that appeals could only be heard at the next board meeting. So I went. That was my first true encounter with Aaron in his natural habitat. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, an old stucco building with bad fluorescent lights that hummed like hornets. I took a seat in the back, papers folded in my lap. There were maybe 20 residents there, murmuring to one another, faces drawn tight. Aaron stood at the front with a gavel, of all things, as if we were convening a court of law. He spoke with practiced ease, reading off a list of infractions like a teacher scolding children. Unmowed lawns, overgrown hedges, faded paint, cars parked too long in driveways. His voice carried an edge of pleasure, like each violation was a personal victory. When it was my turn, I stood and explained. The trailer was a utility cart, stored neatly, used for repairs. It had been there longer than most of the board had lived here. Aaron gave me a thin smile. Mr. McCarthy, with all due respect, standards evolve. The board has voted unanimously to require its removal. You'll have 30 days, I asked to see the vote. He tapped the gavel. Motion closed. Next issue. The room shifted then. Neighbors glanced at me, some sympathetic, some wary, most silent. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I also felt something else. A warning, subtle but sharp. This wasn't just about a cart, it was about control. From that day on, I noticed more. Aaron's SUV parked boldly at the curb where signs read, "No parking fire lane." His lawn service, paid for by dues, mows his yard twice as often as anyone else's. A new HOA bylaw limiting exterior decorations, passed conveniently before Christmas, enforced most heavily on the retired couple who still put up a large nativity. And then there were the whispers, stories of fines doubled without explanation. Families threatened with liens if they didn't comply. One neighbor confided that she'd been told her kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk counted as graffiti. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep my head down, tend my own patch of earth. But then came the letter about road use, a vague clause referencing common area easement, as if the street I'd repaired with my own hands belonged to them now. And sure enough, a week later, the cones went up. That morning, watching Aaron order his volunteers like soldiers, I felt the weight of every warning I'd ignored. The first abuse of power had been small, almost laughable. A cart by the garage. Then it was the neighbor's decorations, fines, threats, each step a little bolder, a little more arrogant. Now he was standing on my asphalt, telling me my driveway was a staging lane. I could see how it would go. The board would meet, nod heads, and pass another vote. Permits would appear out of thin air, stamped with bureaucratic language I couldn't untangle. By the time anyone questioned it, the precedent would be set. Aaron would smile, shake hands, and remind us that rules were for order, not punishment. All while the road I had built my life around became a backdrop for his fairs, his events, his power. Something inside me hardened then. Claire used to tell me that dignity wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Dignity was simply refusing to step back when someone tried to push you off your own ground. And right then, watching Aaron clap a volunteer on the shoulder as if he owned the place, I knew one thing with a clarity I hadn't felt since Claire's last days. I wasn't going to step back. Not this time. I thought the cones were the worst of it. I thought I could outlast a day of their fair, sweep up the glitter, hose down the spilled soda, and reclaim my road once the sun dipped and the last SUV rolled away. But I underestimated Aaron. I underestimated just how much one man, hungry for control, could sink his claws into a neighborhood. It started with letters. 2 days after the fair, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just HOA Compliance Committee, stamped in block letters. Inside, a single sheet. Violation notice. Driveway surface, non-conforming. Asphalt condition is inconsistent with community standards. Fine, $50. Non-conforming. I nearly laughed. That asphalt was my pride. Every crack filled, every edge trimmed, sharp as a ruler. The road where my daughters had skinned their knees learning to bike, where Claire and I had chalked out hopscotch squares just to hear them laugh. I called the number on the letter. A woman answered with a chirpy tone that didn't match her words. "Sir, appeals can only be submitted in writing and will be reviewed at the next board session. I pressed. Who decided my driveway was a violation? I can't speak to individual cases, sir. Please submit in writing. The line went dead. That was the first fine. Within 2 weeks, 3 more followed. Grass length exceeding standards. Trash bin visible from the street. Mailbox, faded paint. Each one carried a fine, each one more absurd than the last. I attended the next board meeting. The clubhouse lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in sickly yellow. 25 neighbors sat stiff in folding chairs, most staring at their laps. Aaron stood at the front again, gavel in hand, voice smooth as silk. We are raising the community standards for the benefit of all residents, he said, each word deliberate. This is about pride in where we live. I raised my hand, violation notices fanned in my grip. These are fabrications. My driveway is fine. My grass is trimmed. My mailbox paint hasn't faded one shade since last year. Aaron tilted his head, a mock sympathy in his eyes. Mr. McCarthy, the committee determined, unanimously, that your property requires attention. This isn't personal. It's a community. Who's on the committee? I asked. He smiled. That's not relevant. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. One, a woman in the back, met my eyes briefly before looking away. I felt the heat climb my neck. You can't just invent violations. Order, Aaron snapped, tapping the gavel. We will not tolerate disruptions. That was the moment I realized it wasn't incompetence, it was designed. Every fine, every rule, every gavel strike was another brick in the wall he was building to box me in. The worst part wasn't Aaron, it was the silence around him. I stopped one of my neighbors, Frank, a man I'd lent tools to for 20 years. This is wrong, I told him. You know my driveway is fine. Frank rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting to the street. Dan, I know, but I've got my own fines. If I speak up, he let the sentence die. Another neighbor, Lisa, whispered as I carried groceries in. We're with you, Dan, but please, don't drag us into it. Fear. That's what Aaron had cultivated. He wasn't just punishing me. He was making an example of me. A lesson to anyone who might think of standing tall. Then came the sabotage. One night I heard a hiss outside my window. Stepping onto the porch, I found my sprinkler line sliced, water spraying across the yard like a severed artery. Another night, my mailbox door hung open, its hinge bent. Inside, my utility bills were gone. I reported both incidents to the board. No response. Reported them to the police. Civil matter, they said. Each morning I woke to a new insult. A fine, a broken fixture, a car idling too long at the curb, and every time I spotted Aaron's SUV cruising slowly past, his window down, sunglasses reflecting my house. The real blow came when I found a second notice taped to my door. Failure to remedy violations may result in a lien against property. Lien. One word, but heavy as a sledgehammer. This was my home, the place where Claire's voice still lingered in the halls, where her roses grew in the front bed, tended by my clumsy hands because she'd asked me, before she passed, never to let them die. And now Aaron was threatening to take it. I sat on the porch that night, fines scattered at my feet, the smell of cut grass heavy in the air. I thought of selling, moving, walking away. But then I remembered Claire's words, whispered from a hospital bed. Don't let them push you out of what you built. So I stayed, and I fought. Weeks bled into months. The fines stacked higher. My savings dwindled, eaten by legal consultations and repairs. Sleep became shallow. Every car door at night jerked me awake. Every letter in the mailbox carried a pulse of dread. I started talking to Claire more than I should have, her photo on the mantle, her memory echoing in my head. What would you do? I'd ask. How do I fight a man who makes the rules up as he goes? The house felt emptier than ever, but also sharper. Every creak in the floorboards reminded me why I couldn't surrender it. At the next meeting, Aaron leaned into his gavel like a king on a throne. We've had some resistance, he said, eyes sweeping the room before settling on me. But let me be clear, the HOA exists to protect property values and community spirit. Those who fail to comply only harm themselves. Laughter rippled, thin, nervous. I stood. You're not protecting anything. You're stealing gasps. A few people shook their heads, urging me to sit. Aaron smirked, savoring it. I'd caution you, Mr. McCarthy, against slander, he said smoothly. We wouldn't want things to escalate further. The words hung heavy, almost a promise. By then I understood the game. Aaron wasn't just a bully. He was an addict. Addicted to power, addicted to watching people fold under him. And I was the one man who hadn't folded yet. Every day, every fine, every smirk chipped at me, yes. But it also carved something harder beneath. Resolve. Because I knew the breaking point was coming. His arrogance wouldn't stop at fines or sabotage. He'd go further. And when he did, I would be ready. The notice came on a Thursday. It wasn't a fine this time. It wasn't even a warning. It was a lien. Official, notarized, and stapled to my front door like a scarlet letter. Effective immediately. Due to continued non-compliance and unpaid fines, the HOA has filed for a lien against the property at 214 Cottonwood Drive. I stood in the doorway, paper trembling in my hands. My chest felt hollow, as if the air had been sucked out of the world. My road, my house, Claire's roses, our memories. All of it threatened now, not just by harassment, but by theft with a legal stamp. That was the breaking point. I spent the next week in silence, not out of defeat, but out of focus. I pulled every letter, every fine, every so-called violation notice from my files, spread them across the dining table like cards in a gambler's last hand. Dates, signatures, contradictions. I saw patterns Aaron hadn't bothered to cover. Duplicate fines for the same offense. Committee signatures that matched his handwriting. Photos attached as evidence with timestamps that didn't line up. He'd overreached, sloppy in his arrogance. But proof wasn't enough. Proof needed eyes. So I started knocking on doors. Some neighbors hesitated, whispering behind chains. But others, those who had been fined, threatened, or silenced, opened wider. A young couple who'd been told their kids' chalk drawings were graffiti. An elderly woman was forced to repaint her shutters 3 times. A veteran whose flagpole was deemed unauthorized. I collected their stories, copied their letters, photographed their notices. By the end of the week, I had a binder thick enough to choke a shredder. It was the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse was packed tighter than I'd ever seen. Folding chairs scraped the floor. The air was sharp with cologne, perfume, and tension. Aaron stood at the front, navy polo crisp, smile polished. His gavel gleamed under the fluorescent light like a weapon. Order, he said smoothly. Tonight's agenda is critical. We are discussing budget allocations, enforcement of community standards, and the matter of ongoing liens. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I sat in the second row, binder on my lap, hands steady for the first time in months. Aaron's eyes swept the room, lingering on me with a faint smirk. He tapped the gavel. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone, disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. He didn't know what was coming. When the floor opened for community comments, I stood. The binder felt heavy in my arms, but my voice was steady. My name is Daniel McCarthy. I've lived here 38 years, and I have something everyone needs to see. Aaron's smile thinned. Mr. McCarthy, if this is about your violations, the matter is closed. I flipped open the binder, holding up a page. This is a violation notice I received. It claims my grass exceeded standards on June 14th, but this photo, the one Aaron himself submitted, was taken on June 12th. 2 days before the alleged violation, gasps, heads turned. I laid another page on the podium. Here's another, a fine for a faded mailbox. Yet this photo, I tapped the glossy print, was taken at night, in the dark. You can't even see the paint color murmurs rose louder this time. Aaron's gavel struck hard. Out of order! This is slander, I snapped the binder shut. Then explain this, Aaron. I lifted a final sheet, 3 violation notices, all with signatures, all the same handwriting. His handwriting. The room erupted, voices clashed, neighbors standing, shouting. Aaron's face flushed crimson. He slammed the gavel until it cracked against the podium. Enough, he roared. But the tide had shifted. One by one, neighbors rose. The young couple, He fined us for our children's chalk drawings. The veteran said my flagpole violated community spirit. The elderly woman made me repaint shutters 3 times, then fined me for the smell of paint. Their words rolled like thunder. Every voice is another nail in his coffin. Aaron stammered, sweat shining under the lights. These are isolated incidents, misunderstandings. But the binder was open now. Pages spread across the podium like evidence in a courtroom. The lies were visible, undeniable. A man in the back, the one I'd seen mowing his lawn at dawn, always quiet, spoke up. I checked with the county office. The HOA never filed permits for the fun run. They staged it illegally. The crowd gasped again, sharper this time. Aaron's composure cracked. His voice rose, frantic. This is a witch hunt. I am protecting our property values. Without order, this community falls apart. I stepped closer, my voice cutting through the chaos. Order isn't control, Aaron. Order isn't fear. Order is respect. And you've never respected a single one of us. For a moment, silence, heavy, absolute. Then the room erupted, not with fear but with fury. Shouts of resign and fraud filled the air. Chairs scraped as people surged forward. Aaron backed away, gavel clutched like a shield. But there was no saving him, not now, not with the entire community awake to his lies. The final blow came from the board itself. One of the members, gray-haired, weary-eyed, stood and said loudly, I move to suspend Aaron pending investigation. Another voice, seconded. A vote was called. Hands shot up, nearly unanimous. Aaron's mouth opened, but no sound came. His gavel slipped from his grip, clattering against the podium. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He turned, tried to leave, but the crowd pressed forward, cameras raised, phones recording. His image, once polished and untouchable, is now trapped in pixels and shame. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I breathed freely. Aaron wasn't king anymore. He was exposed, naked, powerless. The morning after the meeting, my street was quiet. No cones, no SUVs pressed tight against curbs, no laminated tags smirking from dashboards, just silence and the sound of a mourning dove cooing from the cottonwood tree. For the first time in months, I stepped onto the asphalt and felt like it was mine again. Not just mine, but ours, the way it had always been. News traveled fast. Videos from the meeting, Aaron's cracked voice, the binder of evidence, the vote to suspend him, spread across neighborhood group chats within hours. By Saturday, I heard his name in whispers at the grocery store. Within 2 weeks, he resigned for personal reasons. The county opened an investigation into the misuse of HOA funds. His SUV vanished from our streets. The navy polos went with him. The lien on my home dropped. Quietly, without apology, but gone nonetheless. I stood at the county office, papers in hand, reading the single stamped word, released. It felt like a weight sliding from my shoulders. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months began to reappear. Frank, who once turned away, showed up on my porch with a 6-pack of beer. I should have spoken up sooner, he admitted, voice rough. The young couple let their kids draw chalk suns on the sidewalks again. The veteran raised his flag, crisp and high, without fear of fines. Even the elderly woman with the shutters walked more slowly now, her steps less burdened. Something had shifted. Fear had loosened its grip. And though we still had rules, still had a board, they were tempered now, run by people who remembered that power isn't ownership, it's stewardship. One Sunday morning, I wheeled out the old 5-gallon bucket and the broom. Neighbors saw me and one by one joined in. Buckets, brushes, rakes. The road that Aaron had tried to claim became a project of unity. We sealed cracks. We swept clean. We laid down a coat so black it caught the sky in its reflection. Kids ran barefoot across the cool tar edges, laughing, while parents watched with soft smiles. It wasn't just road work, it was reclamation. Proof that this place belonged to us, not to a title, not to a gavel, not to a man in a polo with a fake smile. That night, sitting on the porch, I thought of Claire. Her roses bloomed faintly in the dusk, their petals pale against the shadows. I imagined her sitting beside me, listening as she always did. You'd have liked it tonight, I whispered. Everyone is working together. No fear, just neighbors again. The truth was, I hadn't just fought for asphalt. I'd fought for memory, for her, for our daughters, for every family who wanted a place safe from arrogance. I realized something else too. Dignity isn't given. It's claimed, guarded, and defended. And sometimes defending it means standing alone until others remember how to stand beside you. A month later, I received another envelope from the HOA. My heart stuttered for a moment until I saw the return address. Inside, a simple letter. Mr. McCarthy, the board wishes to thank you for your persistence and courage. Without it, the truth may never have come to light. We are instituting new safeguards, including open voting records and an independent oversight committee. Please accept our gratitude. I folded the letter, set it aside, and smiled. Not because I needed their thanks, but because I knew Claire would have wanted me to see it through. Power can disguise itself in papers, fines, gavels, and titles. It can strut in polos and cologne, speak in smooth, rehearsed lines, and pretend it has the right to dictate the world. But power without respect is nothing more than noise. And in the end, noise always fades. What remains is dignity, the quiet strength of knowing you stood your ground when it mattered. That's what I carry now, every time I step onto my road. My road, our road, and no one will ever take it again.